All right, so welcome to the deep dive, where we, skip the endless scrolling and get right to the heart of things.
Yeah.
Today we're diving into James Clear's Atomic Habits.
Oh, yeah.
It's a book that promises tiny changes, remarkable results.
It really does.
And we've got excerpts from the book itself talking about all sorts of different things,
Yeah.
from the science of habit formation to, the really practical nitty-gritty of building good ones, breaking bad ones.
Yeah. All the strategies.
Yeah, so our mission today, I guess, if you will,
Okay.
is to arm you with a really practical understanding of
Right.
how habits work
Yeah.
and how you can use that to actually achieve your goals without getting bogged down in a bunch of theory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's so cool about the book is it's actually very counterintuitive.
Okay.
A lot of times we think if we want big results, we need to make these big sweeping changes.
Right.
But the book starts out by talking about this idea that, you can achieve huge success through just these small 1% improvements every day.
Oh, wow.
And he really kind of illustrates this with the story of the British cycling team,
Okay. The British cycling team.
which had for years been like, kind of mediocre.
Yeah.
And then they hired this guy, Dave Brailsford, who was all about this idea of the aggregation of marginal gains.
Aggregation of what?
Marginal gains, so like little
Yeah.
tiny improvements, but aggregating, adding them all up.
Okay.
And they looked at everything, like from the kind of massage gel they used
Oh, wow.
to how the riders wash their hands
Oh, wow.
to minimize illness
Interesting.
to the type of pillows they slept on to the color of the team truck.
Like everything.
Every little thing. And they even learned how to like sit on a bike more efficiently.
So how did they figure that out? Like, did they bring in like a biomechanics expert or something?
Yeah, exactly. They had like all kinds of experts come in and help them figure out
Wow.
every single tiny area where they could gain a little advantage.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah, and the result of this was they went from being, kind of like this mediocre cycling team to like completely dominating the sport.
Oh, wow.
So they won multiple Olympic gold medals, Tour de France victories, and it was all just through these little tiny 1% improvements
Wow.
that really added up.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really illustrates that point you're making, that it's not about
Yeah.
making these huge sweeping changes. It's
Extra
about
work.
consistency over time.
Yes, and one of the things that can be discouraging for people is
Okay.
when you first start out, making these small changes, you don't see any results.
Right.
And so the book talks about this thing called the Valley of
To
Disappointment.
valley of.
Disappointment,
Okay.
which is like this period
Okay.
where you're putting in the effort,
Yeah.
you're making the small changes, but you don't see any tangible results yet.
Right. So you're saying that results aren't linear.
They're not.
Okay.
They're more exponential.
Right.
And so it can be discouraging
Yeah.
because we expect, if I go to the gym for 2 weeks, I should see some results.
Right. Right. Or if I, commit to writing every day or something, I should be,
Yeah.
pumping out pages like crazy.
And he gives this really cool example of bamboo.
Okay.
When you plant bamboo, nothing happens for the first like 5 years.
Wow.
You're watering it, you're fertilizing it, and it's like,
Nothing's happening.
it looks like you're wasting your time.
Right.
But then suddenly, almost overnight,
Yeah.
it just shoots up like 80 feet.
Wow.
And it's because it's been building this massive root system underground the whole time.
Gotcha.
And so it's this idea that you have to trust the process. The results will come, but they may be delayed.
So basically, don't give up even if you don't see results immediately,
Exactly.
because something might be happening under the surface that you don't even realize.
Absolutely. And the next thing we're going to get into is actually how habits work. The book gives us this really useful framework called the 4 laws of behavior change.
Okay, lay it on me.
Okay. So they are the 4 parts of what's called the habit loop.
Okay.
So it goes cue, craving, response, and reward.
Okay, so the cue is what triggers the habit.
Yes, it's like the signal to your brain
Okay,
that tells you to start a behavior.
got it.
And then the craving is the motivational force behind it.
Okay,
So it's what you desire.
right.
It's what you're anticipating getting from the habit.
Makes sense.
And then the response is the actual habit itself.
Okay,
So it's the action you take.
gotcha.
And then the reward is the end goal.
Yeah,
That's the satisfaction you get from doing the habit.
okay.
And that's what reinforces the whole loop.
Oh, so it's like a cycle.
It is. Yeah, it's like a feedback loop in your brain.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and so, to give you a couple examples.
Okay, yeah. Let's put this into practice.
Okay, so imagine you walk past a bakery.
Oh, I love bakery.
Yeah, and you smell that delicious fresh bread.
Okay, that's my cue right there.
Exactly. That's the cue.
Okay,
The smell is the cue.
got it.
And then you start craving a pastry,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Right, and that's the craving.
Okay.
And then you go in, you buy the croissant, you eat it.
The response.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then you feel satisfied, you've satisfied that craving.
Right.
That's the reward.
Okay.
And so your brain learns to associate the smell of the bakery
Okay.
with the pleasure of eating the pastry.
So that's why it's so hard to walk past a bakery
Exactly.
without going in.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay.
I'm with you.
Okay, so here's another example. Let's say you're at work
Okay.
and you're feeling kind of stuck. You're not really making progress on a project.
Okay. So that's the cue.
Yes, the feeling of being stuck is the cue.
Okay.
And then you start craving a little bit of relief.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
Right.
I need a break.
You need a break. You need something to kind of distract you.
Right.
So that's the craving.
Okay.
And then you respond by picking up your phone. Of course. And checking social media.
The response.
Exactly.
Okay.
And, you see some funny memes, you get a little hit of dopamine.
I get a little rush of satisfaction.
Yes, exactly. That's the reward.
Got it.
And so now your brain starts to associate the feeling of being stuck
Okay.
with the relief of checking social media.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. So this is the basic framework of how all habits work.
That's really insightful.
Yeah. And the book uses this framework to give us strategies for changing our habits.
Okay, so let's dive into those strategies because I'm already feeling like I need some help.
Yeah. So the first law is make it obvious.
Okay, make it obvious. So, what does that actually mean, practically speaking?
So the first step is to become aware of your current habits.
Okay.
Because you can't change something you don't even realize you're doing.
Right.
So the book suggests this exercise called the habit scorecard.
Okay. A scorecard. I like it already.
Yeah, it's really simple. You just write down everything you do in a day from the moment you wake up.
Okay, so even the bad habits.
Even the bad habits, you just want to be completely objective.
Gotcha. So no judgment, just observation.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay.
And once you have this awareness, then you can start to design your environment to make good habits more obvious.
Okay, so the environment plays a big role.
It does, yeah.
Yes.
The book talks about this psychologist, Kurt Lewin,
Okay.
who had this equation B equals F of PE,
Oh.
meaning behavior is a function of the person and their environment.
So our environment is a huge factor in
Huge fact.
shaping our habits.
Yeah, and to illustrate this, the book gives this example of the Massachusetts General Hospital cafeteria.
Okay, what happened there?
So they wanted people to drink more water.
Okay.
So they just made bottled water more available,
Okay.
put it in more visible locations.
Okay.
And as a result, people started drinking more water.
So they didn't even have to tell people to drink more water?
Yeah.
Just made it
More obvious.
more readily available.
Yes.
Wow, that's amazing.
And so you can use this same principle in your own life.
Okay.
If you want to practice guitar more, leave your guitar out in the open.
Okay.
If you want to eat more fruit, keep a bowl of fruit on the counter.
Okay.
If you're trying to reduce your social media, put your phone in a different room.
Right out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly.
I like it.
And the book also talks about this idea that context is the cue,
What does that mean?
meaning that we associate certain habits
Okay.
with certain environments.
Okay.
So think about it, if you walk into a library,
Yeah.
you're more likely to be quiet and focused.
Right.
But if you walk into a sports bar,
Yeah.
you're more likely to be, loud and social.
Right.
So the environment itself is a cue.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And so you can use this to your advantage by creating dedicated spaces for certain activities.
Okay, so a one space, one use kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're trying to improve your sleep quality,
Okay.
don't work in your bed.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. Keep your bed for sleep only.
Makes sense.
And then have a designated workspace.
Okay.
So that when you sit down at your desk,
Right.
your brain knows it's time to work.
Yeah, my brain's like, oh, we're here to work,
Exactly.
not to scroll on TikTok.
Right.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, we often think that self-discipline is just about willpower.
Right.
But this law suggests that it's more about
Okay.
designing your environment
Right.
to avoid temptation.
So you're saying that people who seem like they have amazing self-control
Yeah.
are actually just really good at avoiding temptation.
Exactly.
Interesting. So it's not about willpower.
Not necessarily.
It's about being smart about your environment.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that.
And then the second law is make it attractive.
Okay, make it attractive. So how do we do that?
Well, this is all about dopamine,
Dopamine, the
the pleasure chemical.
feel-good chemical.
Yes, exactly. And so, our brains were wired to seek out things that release dopamine. And so if we can make our good habits more dopamine-inducing,
Okay.
they'll be more attractive.
How do we do that?
Well, one way is through something called temptation bundling.
Temptation bundling. Okay, I like the sound of that.
Yeah, so this is basically pairing something you want to do
Okay.
with something you need to do.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
So, for example, let's say you need to work out,
Yeah, I need to work out,
but you don't really want to.
right?
So you could bundle that with watching your favorite TV show
Okay, so I can only watch my favorite TV show
while you're working out.
if I'm working out.
Exactly.
Oh,
Oh, okay, I could get down with that.
yeah, and so now the workout becomes more attractive.
Because I'm associating it with something I enjoy.
Exactly.
Okay.
I like that.
Yeah, and the book also talks about the importance of social influence.
Okay, so like peer pressure?
Kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's more about the fact that we're social creatures
Right.
and we want to fit in.
We want to be part of the group.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
so if we can surround ourselves with people who have the habits we want,
Okay.
it'll make those habits more attractive to us.
Okay, so if I want to be a runner,
Yeah,
I should join a running club.
exactly.
Makes sense.
And then the book talks about this idea of reframing our habits.
Reframing. Okay.
So instead of focusing on what we're giving up,
Okay.
we focus on the benefits we're getting.
Okay, I like that.
So for example, the book talks about Alan Carr's method for quitting smoking,
Okay.
which instead of emphasizing like all the bad things about smoking,
Yeah.
it focuses on all the good things about not smoking.
Okay, so it's like a positive spin.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so by reframing the habit in this way,
All right.
it becomes more attractive.
Because you're focusing on the positive.
Exactly.
I like that.
So that's make it attractive. And then the third law
Okay.
is make it easy.
Okay. Make it easy. That sounds pretty self-explanatory.
It does, but there's actually a lot to it.
Okay.
So the underlying principle here is the law of least effort.
Law of least effort. So we're all lazy.
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Our brains are wired to conserve energy,
Okay.
and so we're naturally drawn to things that are easy.
Right.
And so if we can make our good habits easier to do,
Okay.
they'll be more likely to stick.
Makes sense.
And the book is this great analogy of a garden hose.
Okay. A garden hose.
So if you want more water to come out of the hose,
Okay.
you have two options. You can either crank up the water pressure,
Okay.
or you can remove the kinks in the hose.
Right.
And so the same thing applies to habits,
Okay.
We can either try to force ourselves to do them with willpower,
Right.
or we can make them easier to do.
Just remove the kinks.
Exactly.
Okay. I like that analogy.
Yeah, and the book also talks about this idea of addition by subtraction,
Addition by subtraction. Okay.
which is basically removing obstacles
Okay.
to make things easier.
Makes sense.
So for
Yeah.
example, Japanese companies are known for their efficiency. And one of the things they do is they constantly look for ways to eliminate waste
Okay.
in their processes.
So they're removing the kinks.
Exactly.
Okay.
And we can do the same thing with our habits.
Okay.
If we can remove the friction,
Right.
it'll make it easier to do the things we want to do.
So like meal prep.
Meal prep.
Like if I prepare all my meals for the week
Exactly.
on Sunday, then I'm less likely to order takeout.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've removed the friction of having to cook every night.
Right. Exactly.
And the book also talks about this really cool rule called the 2-minute rule,
The 2-minute rule. Okay.
which is basically saying that when you're starting a new habit,
Okay.
you should make it so easy that it takes less than 2 minutes to do.
Okay. So if I want to start running,
Yeah.
my 2-minute version would just be to put on my running shoes.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's it.
That's it. Just put on the shoes.
Yeah, and the idea is that once you've started,
Okay.
it's easier to keep going.
So it's like tricking your brain.
Kinda, yeah.
Okay.
It's about lowering the barrier to entry.
I like that.
Yeah. And the book also talks about decisive moments,
Decisive moments.
which are these small choices
Okay.
that can have a big impact on our future behavior.
Okay. Can you give me an example?
Yeah, so like, let's say you're deciding what to eat for dinner.
Okay.
If you walk into a fast food restaurant,
Yeah.
you're more likely to eat something unhealthy.
Right.
But if you walk into a health food store,
Okay.
you're more likely to eat something healthy.
So the decision of where I go
Exactly.
is the decisive moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so by being aware of these decisive moments,
Right.
we can make choices that set us up for success.
Okay.
And then the book talks about commitment devices.
Commitment devices. Okay. What are those?
So these are basically ways to lock in future behavior
Okay.
by making it harder to do the things we don't want to do.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So for example, the book tells the story of Victor Hugo,
Victor Hugo.
who was a famous writer, and he was having trouble writing.
Oh, okay.
So he had his servant lock away all his clothes
What?
so that he couldn't leave the house.
So he had to write?
He had to write.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and so that's a pretty extreme example.
Right.
But you could use commitment devices in more subtle ways.
Okay.
Like, if you're trying to save money,
Okay.
you could set up an automatic transfer
Right.
from your checking account to your savings account.
So I don't even have to think about it.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. I like that.
Yeah, and technology can be a really helpful tool for this.
Right.
You can use website blockers
Yes.
to block distracting websites.
Yes.
You can use apps that track your progress.
Right.
You can even use social media
Okay.
to hold yourself accountable.
Okay, so make it public.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so all of these things can make it easier to stick to our good habits.
Okay, so that's the third law. Make it easy. And then the fourth law.
The fourth law is make it satisfying.
Okay, make it satisfying.
And this is all about rewards. Rewards.
Okay.
Uh,
Because our brains are wired to repeat behaviors that are rewarding.
Right.
And so if we can make our good habits rewarding,
Okay.
we'll be more likely to stick to them.
Makes sense.
And so one of the best ways to make a habit rewarding is to track your progress.
Okay, tracking. So like using a habit tracker.
Exactly.
Right.
You can use an app, you can use a notebook, you can just use a calendar.
Right.
But the important thing is to visually see your progress.
Okay, so like Jerry Seinfeld's don't break the chain method,
Yes, exactly.
where you mark an X on the calendar
Yep.
for every day you stick to your habit.
Exactly. And this is rewarding for a few reasons.
Okay.
First of all, it makes you aware of your progress,
Okay.
which can be motivating.
Right.
Second, it gives you a sense of accomplishment
Yeah.
when you see that chain of X's.
Right.
And third, it helps you stay accountable
Okay.
because you don't want to break the chain.
Right. I don't want to mess up my beautiful chain of X's.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. And the book also talks about the importance of immediate rewards.
Okay, immediate rewards, so not waiting for the long-term benefit.
Right, because those can be too far off.
Right, you need something to keep you going in the short term.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so you can do this by giving yourself small rewards
Okay.
after you complete a habit.
So like if I go for a run,
Yeah,
I can reward myself with like a bubble bath.
exactly. Or like a healthy smoothie.
Like a healthy smoothie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And ideally, the reward should align with your overall goals.
Right. So if I'm trying to lose weight,
Yeah.
I shouldn't reward myself with a donut.
Right, exactly.
Okay, makes sense.
And then the book also talks about how to make bad habits unsatisfying.
Unsatisfying. Okay, why don't we do that?
Well, one way is to add a cost to the bad habit.
A cost. Okay.
So, for example, the book tells the story of this guy, Brian Harris,
Okay.
who wanted to lose weight.
Okay.
And so he made a bet with his wife and his trainer
Okay.
that if he didn't meet his weight loss goals, he would have to pay them a certain amount of money.
Oh, wow.
And he also had to wear his rival sports team's gear for a week.
Oh my gosh. That's like public humiliation.
It is.
Okay.
But it worked.
It worked.
He lost the weight.
Wow. So the fear of losing money and looking silly
Exactly.
was enough to keep him on track.
Yep.
Okay, that's amazing.
Yeah. And so you can use this same principle
Right.
in your own life.
Okay.
You can make a bet with a friend.
Right.
You could join a support group.
Okay.
You could even just tell people about your goals.
Oh, yeah. Accountability.
Accountability, exactly.
Makes sense.
And so by making bad habits unsatisfying,
Right.
we're less likely to do them.
Got it.
And so those are the 4 laws of behavior change.
Okay, that was a lot to take in,
Yeah.
but I feel like I have a much better understanding of how habits work now.
Good. I'm glad.
So what about like people who already have good habits in place?
Yeah.
Like what's next for them?
Well, the book also talks about some advanced tactics for going from good to great.
Okay, from good to great.
Yeah. So one of the things it talks about is the importance of deliberate practice,
Deliberate practice.
which is basically focusing on improving your weaknesses.
Okay, so not just doing the same thing over and over again.
Right. It's about pushing yourself
Gotcha.
to get better.
Okay.
And the book gives the example of this guy, Scott Adams, who created Dilbert.
Dilbert the comic strip.
Yeah. And he talks about how he's not actually that great at drawing.
Really?
Yeah, but he's really good at writing jokes.
Okay.
And he's also good at business.
Okay.
And so by combining those skills,
Right.
he was able to create this incredibly successful comic strip.
Wow, so it's not just about being good at one thing.
No.
It's about finding your unique combination of skills.
Exactly.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and the book also talks about the importance of staying motivated.
Okay.
And one of the ways to do that is by following the Goldilocks rule,
The Goldilocks rule. Okay.
which basically says that we're most motivated when we're working on tasks that are just the right level of difficulty.
Just the right level of difficulty. Okay.
Not too easy, Not too hard.
So like the sweet spot.
Yeah, like the sweet spot.
Okay.
And this is because if something is too easy,
Yeah.
we get bored.
Right.
But if it's too hard,
Yeah.
we get discouraged.
Right.
So we need to find that Goldilocks zone.
The Goldilocks zone. I like it.
Right.
Okay, so how do we find that zone?
Well, it's different for everyone,
Right.
but it's about constantly challenging yourself
Okay.
without getting overwhelmed.
Okay, so it's a constant process of adjustment.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the book also talks about the importance of showing up even when you don't feel like it.
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one.
It is. Yeah, but it's essential
Okay.
because motivation is fleeting.
It comes and goes.
Exactly.
Okay.
But discipline is what gets you through.
Right, so even when you don't feel like it,
Even when you don't feel like it,
you just have to do it.
you just have to do it.
You know?
And the book quotes this elite coach who says that the difference between the best and the rest
Okay.
is that the best are willing to do the boring work.
The boring work.
Yeah, the stuff that nobody else wants to do
Right.
because they know that's what it takes to get to the top.
Wow. That's really inspiring.
Yeah. And the book also talks about the importance of reflection.
Reflection. Oh,
Yeah,
got
so
this.
taking time to look back on your progress
Okay.
and see what's working and what's not,
Okay.
and then making adjustments accordingly.
So like a feedback loop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the book gives some examples of how top performers do this.
Okay.
Like Eliud Kipchoge, who's the world record holder in the marathon.
Okay.
He keeps detailed notes on all of his training runs,
Wow.
and then he reviews them after every run.
So he can see what he needs to improve.
Exactly.
Wow.
And Chris Rock, the comedian,
Yeah.
he tries out new jokes at small clubs,
Okay.
and then he pays attention to the audience's reaction,
Okay.
and then he refines his jokes based on that feedback.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So he's constantly iterating.
Exactly.
Okay. That's amazing.
Yeah. And so the point is that even the best are always looking for ways to improve.
Right. So there's always room for growth.
Always.
Okay. Like that.
And then the book also talks about a potential downside
A downside.
of having too much pride in your good habits.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So once you've built an identity around being a certain type of person,
Okay.
you know, like a healthy person
Yeah.
or a productive person,
Right.
it can be hard to let go of that identity.
Okay.
Even if it's no longer serving you.
So you're saying that sometimes our good habits can actually hold us back.
Yeah, they can make us resistant to change.
Okay. That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, and so the book encourages us to be humble
Okay.
and to always be willing to learn and grow.
So don't get too attached to your identity.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so, you know, as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I think the main takeaway is that success is not a destination.
Okay.
It's a system.
A system. Okay.
Yeah. It's a system of continuous improvement.
So it's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly.
Okay. I like that.
And the 4 laws of behavior change are basically a framework
Okay.
for building that system.
Right.
And so if you're struggling with your habits,
Yeah.
it's probably not because you're a bad person.
Okay.
It's probably because you have a bad system.
Okay.
And so by using these 4 laws, you can create a system
Right.
that makes it easier to do the things you want to do.
That's really empowering.
Yeah. And the book also talks about the importance of having a strong why.
A strong why. Okay.
Yeah, so knowing why you want to change your habits.
Or that-
Because if you have